What is up, guys? Here, I'm going to turn that down just a little bit. Just a little bit so that I'm not peaking the whole freaking time. I like this song. What's up, everybody? How's everybody doing? Oh, man. Looks like everything's running pretty good. Bitrate looks fine. Just move this a little bit. Let me do a quick check over here. Everything looks like it's gonna be good. Yep. Okay. That'll do just fine. Cool. Everything. Oh, the chat. There we go. I knew I was missing something. Okay, yeah, that's what it is. It's too cropped. Cool. Yeah, we'll just keep you guys up here. Sweet. We should be totally live, ready to go. Oh, let me just fix that little edge right there. Someone told me I need to do more of this stuff. Oh, before we get going. And they probably have a point, honestly, but yeah, it's not quite my speed. Plus, I really hate that yellow line being there. Alright, I gotta turn this down just a little bit. It's really loud. Especially for me. I'm sure it's not that loud for you guys, but there we go. So what we're gonna do is we'll just turn it up on y'all's end. Hey, what's up, my dude? What's up? So today's episode, we're gonna shoot for like an hour. We're not gonna. Hey, what's up, man? We're not gonna really push it. But we do have a lot of stuff to talk about. Especially, I mean, I don't have to tell you guys. Last week has been. It's been something. So, in a minute here, I will start the recording of the show. Glad to see that we already got a couple people here. What's up? Oh yeah, After Dark. What's up, man? Yeah, it's the sun has finally started to set here. You can tell it's getting later on in the year because the days are getting a little bit longer. And they feel like they're getting longer too. Hey Mary, how's it going? Oh jeez. I mean it feels like I haven't streamed in like 2 weeks, 3 weeks, but it's only been a week. It's crazy. And so much has changed since then. We're going to talk about a couple different things that have changed. We're going to talk about all of the things that I'm sure a lot of you guys already know about, but then we're going to go into a little bit of speculation. Some things that have been going through my mind that I think will really make for some interesting conversation. And I would appreciate, I appreciate you guys being here. That's basically what I'm saying. To be a part of that conversation. Yeah, as you guys can see, we got the coronavirus map and everything behind us. So pure boredom every day here in New York. Dude, I could totally imagine that. It is your 40th birthday. Happy birthday to Mary. Very, very awesome. Hope you had an amazing quarantined birthday. I know I did. So, literally did the same thing for my birthday that we did every other day this week. Absolutely nothing. All right. Cuomo is a dumbass dwarf. Yeah, that's one way of putting it. Or dwarf. Oh, there we go. I read it correctly, but it was not typed correctly. It's all good. I got you, though. I get where you're coming from. All right. It has been a great day. Good. I'm glad to hear it. We'll say 2 minutes, and then we're going to get started. We're gonna have to change this music though, because this is not appropriate for the talking. Hopefully I can get myself a job in time. I got laid off from my job like 3 weeks ago. Yeah, we're gonna be talking about that, man. I was so angry, dude. I would be too. This is it's rough times, man. We're gonna be talking about. Well, you'll see. I can't say that I necessarily have good news for anybody, but I felt like it would be at least interesting to hear it from somebody who has nothing to gain from all of this. Just my take on all of the happenings, the information that we have. So I'm gonna really try not to do coronavirus for the next freaking 3 months or however long this is gonna be a thing. And yeah, so we'll but I really feel like we need to talk about it because I think some of the things that are coming up are going to be pretty interesting. What's up, Three Juggler? How's it going, man? Yeah, just like another minute here. What's everybody drinking? I know most of the people here have some beverage of choice. I got a couple of tall boys just for this occasion. Hey, out of curiosity, man, where did you work? The globalists are really trying to control everything. I doubt that happens, but this will turn into a bloodbath if this stupidity continues. I mean, I guess that's one option. We'll yeah, we're going to talk about a couple different potential outcomes of all of this. Rum and Coke, good option. I like it. Chat's looking pretty snappy today. That's good. All right, I think I'm gonna go ahead and start the recording for this. We've put it off long enough. Orange juice, getting your vitamin C. I see. All right, I'm gonna hit the record button on my end. I used to work at Texas Roadhouse, but I was planning on getting my A+ certification for computer IT. To be honest, both of those are not so great industries to be in right now. But yeah, especially, man, if you work in any kind of food industry, that's is a bad time to work in food. Bad time. So yeah, let's go ahead and get this started. I'm gonna leave the music on for you guys. I'm gonna do a local recording on my side. So basically, that doesn't really mean anything for you guys. It should just be really ambient music anyways. If you want me to turn it up or down, just let me know. I can do that. And yeah, cool. So this is just for the podcast. Nothing else changes. I'm sure most of you guys have been here for a live show. So give me like 2 seconds to do an intro, and then we'll be back to talking. How's it going, ladies and gentlemen? My name is Christian, and welcome to Liberty After Dark on this 4th of April. Just wanted to say real quick, happy birthday to Mary, who's here in the chat. We are going to be talking about, of course, the same thing everybody else on planet Earth is talking about at the moment. The dreaded, the horrible, the terrifying, invisible enemy that is the coronavirus. So I'm not going to beat around the bush, guys. I'm already sick of talking about this thing, and I literally just came out of my mouth. I understand the importance of us talking about this, but that doesn't mean that I am. I'm really excited to be having this conversation right now. But I think it's important to kind of hear just a recap of everything that's going on first, and then some predictions from a guy who has no horse in this race, right? I mean, I have a horse in the race, but I have no horse in some sort of agenda, right? So I'm just going to give you guys what I believe to be the most objective truth in this situation. And then from there, we will just kind of talk. We'll hash it out a little bit. But if you can't tell by the title of this stream, I think that this is going to be... This is kind of a tangled web, but this is going to be a pretty big event for an entire generation of people. perhaps more than an entire generation of people, depending on how the next few months go. But yeah, so let's go ahead and get into it. I hope everybody's having a wonderful day in the chat. Most of you guys I was already talking to before we started this. Thanks, 3Juggler, for the compliment. Appreciate you. Whenever we start talking about the coronavirus, I think it's really important that we take as much of a step back as possible and we try to look at this objectively and in the truest sense of the word. So objectivity meaning factual, meaning can be proven beyond a reasonable doubt or as close to it as possible, right? Can be rationalized, things like that. 3Juggler says, I feel like I'm watching Fox News. I don't know if that's a compliment or an insult. I guess it depends on where you stand, right? Maybe he's saying I have high production values. Appreciate it. So, yeah, like I said, it's important to keep everything in the context of we should avoid falling into the pit traps of subjectivity as much as possible. And one thing that I'd like to comment on that I think, for the most part, people are getting better at, but especially when this was all first coming out and was kind of new, is the trap of the argument from authority fallacy, right? For those of you who don't know, an argument from authority fallacy is basically where you say, super smart person with X credentials said Y, therefore Y must be true. It's not a logically conducive statement. Somebody with the right credentials can say completely false things all the time. But this is a two-way street, right? So to give you an example, let's say you're on Twitter and someone posts a link from Dr. whoever. Pick any of the doctors that are leading this coronavirus task force. But no, you're fine, 3Juggler. Don't worry about it. Take any of the doctors that are leading this task force that we have for the coronavirus and run with it, right? And they say, let's say they post something that says like coronavirus is going to kill like 80 billion people, which physically is impossible because we don't have that many people. And then somebody posts that, and it's just a tweet, and all it says is coronavirus is going to wipe out humanity or whatever. And then someone else posts a tweet that says coronavirus is a cover up by Big Pork to get people to stop worrying about pork or swine flu or something, And they're both posted by people with PhDs who work in medical facilities across the planet. That doesn't mean that these people are innately speaking in truths, right? A fallacy is a statement that is not rationally founded. You said earlier that the IT industry is doing bad as a result of the coronavirus. Are IT businesses losing jobs? You got any sources? We'll get to jobs in a minute, man. I'll come back to that one for sure, though. Whenever, like I said, though, the appeal to authority fallacy is it's something that, like, we do it all the time, say, for example, when we talk to medical professionals. And just because we have this appeal to authority doesn't necessarily mean that it's always a bad thing to go off of, right? But what's important to remember is that when you're having an argument with somebody or a debate or whatever it may be, or just a conversation, when you say something like, what's a good way of putting this? If someone were to say, here's Super Smart Man's opinion, and you say, well, I don't respect Super Smart Man, here's another Super Smart Man who says something else, right? Scientist A versus Scientist B. That's not a rational argument. It doesn't work. That's why it's a fallacy. Just because someone says something and has credentials doesn't make it true. So I'll get off of that soapbox for a second. Just, I used to do it a lot, but, try to watch yourself if you get into these conversations of kind of being picking and choosing links. Because really when it comes down to it, if there's no information or evidence with the person's opinion, it doesn't really matter. We'll talk about the distribution of the disease in a minute as well. But so to press from that, a week ago, we were in a significantly different place than we were at this exact moment. I had a chart up in front of me. I don't have it open on my desktop anymore, but I do have it over here just to give you a perspective. A week ago today was the 28th of March. And excuse me, the United States had a total coronavirus case of 123,000 people. Okay. Right now, we are at this exact moment, 310,000. So in the past week, we've not quite tripled, but pretty close to tripled our total number. Now, this does by state and by county. It doesn't do by country. But I think it is, this map, I think, is a good just, if we're going to zoom in on this later, and we'll talk about some of the stuff in CONUS. But it's definitely going to be interesting to look at how the distribution of all of this moves. So we got here pretty much Fauci lying on every MSM or big network to promote the fear porn of the virus, but then contradicts himself by admitting the virus isn't that dangerous to kill many people. So I guess we'll just go ahead and we'll start talking about this. Let's talk about lethality, right? What is the danger of this virus? So there's a lot of debate on this number. And I don't know if the specific number matters, right? I think if we have a ballpark guess, in this case, that's good enough to determine what we should be doing, right? And I want to go ahead and preface that everything that I'm saying is from the perspective of someone who believes in no involvement of government. I'm a voluntarist. I'm an extremist, radical. I get that. It's fine. I want to have a conversation about this. So if I seem like I'm biased, I'm going to try to separate myself from those biases. But what is the appropriate response to this, right? Well, I've heard people say that, if you look at Italy, that's closer to like almost an 8 to 9% fatality rate at this point. That's quite high. There's some interesting conversation on whether or not they're accurately reporting deaths. If they just have COVID, is that also being put on their death certificate, or are they only doing it for patients who are specifically dying of COVID-related illnesses? It's kind of up in the air. It's kind of been on a doctor by doctor basis, but I think it's being standardized a lot more. I know it is. It's being standardized a lot more as we go on because people are realizing how important that is for reporting statistics. So I had someone bring up the fact that, we had the swine flu infected, 52 million people overall or something like that, and we only had less than 50,000 deaths. Well, we're already on pace to beat that. So if the coronavirus only has so let's say it stays at 3% and it infects 52 million people, that's a 1.34 or 1.4 million people. That's a big deal, right? And three jugglers, yes, you are right. Or sorry, rattlers, you are right. It does mostly threaten older people, but it is not impossible for someone who's young to succumb to the illness. It's very unlikely. Typically, if you're extremely young, even then, they don't seem to be as susceptible. But if you're extremely young to very old, that makes a big difference. Can you see New Zealand? Sure, I'll scroll over to New Zealand. Where is it? Somewhere over... oh, there it is. Yeah, it's on the bottom. I'll go ahead and pull the numbers up too. So, like I was saying, yeah, it does target older people a lot. And we're reaching this point now where we have to start asking, like, what are we looking at long term, right? We're seeing a lot of estimates that go through July and August, but we aren't really seeing anything that brings us through August into other parts of the year. Say we get out of August and then we go to I swear to God, I know my September, October, November, we go into all these months. I'm trying to scroll and talk at the same time, and it's really messing me up. But yeah, so like I was saying, as we move forward, right, there's a lot of fear that this will become a seasonal disease. And if it does, will we have a vaccine ready by the next time around? And I know vaccine is a word. A lot of people, the vaccine. We're going to take a step back from that for a minute. We can have that conversation another day. But if, you know, if they develop a vaccine before a second wave comes, then we should be fine. So Dr. Fauci did bring up an interesting point. I know a lot of people don't like his opinion. Whatever. I'm gonna talk about him. I'm gonna give everybody the same level of credibility that I talk about today, just to make it a fair playing field. Because if I accept one of them, I have to accept all of them, on the basis of them being medical professionals with credentials. So basically, he was talking about the fact that it's almost certainly going to be seasonal, because of the fact that even if the coronavirus were to be weaker in the summer than it is in the spring or in the fall and winter, kind of like how flu is, it's still in the southern hemisphere in these regions without good medical infrastructures, and so it will have the ability to survive in those regions, in you know, the southern hemisphere. You know, South America, Africa, Southeast Asia, these are all places that the coronavirus can still happily chug along, even without any environmental factors to overcome, which even then, it's not suggested that we have any evidence to believe that the heat will somehow annihilate the coronavirus. I don't believe that Antarctica has any cases, because there are very few people on Antarctica. I think Antarctica is one of the few regions that doesn't have any cases. I know we're well into the triple digits of countries that have coronavirus. I mean, and if you look by region, even, you can tell there are lots and lots of areas that have coronavirus. You know, even until the beginning of March, a lot of Africa was kind of untouched just because of the way that migration works there. But even now, slowly but surely, it is spreading across Africa, and it does target the most highly populated areas, which we'll talk about in a minute. But yes, even Madagascar has cases. They have 70 cases. Pretty much the whole world does, minus a few specific places. You know, Greenland has 11 cases, for Pete's sake, or 7 cases currently, 11 total. But we have to start asking ourselves, okay, so we've talked about how strong the disease is a little bit. You know, it doesn't really matter if it's 1 to 3%, if it's really even 0.5 to 0.75%. If it infects as many people as it possibly could, then it could definitely be an issue, right? Like, I don't think it's partisan or statist of us to say that, yeah, potentially millions of people dying to a disease is a big deal. It could really mess things up. I don't think that's even irresponsible to say. But I do think that we can then say, what are our possible responses to it, and is it worth it? Okay. So this is really where we stop kind of recapping what has been going on with the coronavirus. Like, we get it. It's been spreading pretty fast. I remember I posted something talking about Harris County, and I don't know if it'll go to the specific counties in this area. But yeah, it doesn't look like it will. It'll do counties for some areas, but not here. Harris County has like freaking almost octupled since the last time I brought the number up. It kind of blew my mind almost. But I mean, New York is over 100,000. Yeah, 103,652 cases in just New York. I mean, it has grown very rapidly. But again, we have to start looking at what we're doing is that we're going for social distancing and quarantining, right? And social distancing and quarantining has some very specific repercussions, and we're seeing that in the economy, right? So I'm sure it's no surprise to anybody that we have over 7 million people in the last 2 weeks sign up for unemployment. And that's the very beginning of all of this, right? It's projected that by as early as April 12th, up to the end of April, we could have over 20 million brand new unemployment applications. And I want people to kind of step back for a second and realize that that would mean that almost 10%, it'd be like 8.5% of the US population would be unemployed. That is crazy. 30 million people would be, yeah, that's just about 9%. Because we have 330 million, barring the census doesn't come out anytime soon, which I don't really think it will. And that unemployment number is staggeringly large. And it'll be really interesting to see how quickly it recovers, right? Because right now, one of the issues that a lot of people are having is getting access to money, okay? Without going into the efficacy of a $2 trillion stimulus package from the government, which is not what I'm really here to talk about today, the money that was promised to the ordinary people, like small business owners, the stimulus check, really very little to none of that has materialized yet. The loans that were supposed to be available for small businesses same day, some of the small businesses still can't even get their banks to like acknowledge that they exist. And you know, again, whether we like the fact that these are things or not, the fact of the matter is that some people are dependent on this. Like, some people have no choice. And in my humble opinion, if the government is going to pretend like it has the right to shut you down and is going to use force to make sure that you are shut down, it does at that point have some sort of an obligation to make sure that you aren't financially ruined by this. Obviously, it should never get to that point, in my humble opinion, but if they cause you to go out of business, they should be held responsible for your financial ruining. And the fact that a lot of this isn't available yet is an issue. Now, okay, so when I say the coronavirus will define a generation, this kind of really just hit me over the last few days as I was thinking about this. It was yesterday. Was it yesterday? I think Friday, Thursday or Friday, when the 20 million new unemployed by the end of April projection came out. That was like a sobering moment for me, where I kind of like slinked back in my chair a little bit, and I just said like, "Whoa, that's a big deal. That's a big deal." And it made me realize a couple things really fast. Is that this is, if the government was, and this is not me being political, this is just making a statement. It is a political statement, but this isn't me being biased. If they were ever to try to push normalizing massive social programs like a UBI, like single payer healthcare, blah blah blah, XYZ, etc., this would be the time to do it. Okay? So we heard Nancy Pelosi talking earlier today about how the $2 trillion stimulus package was great. It was bipartisan. The president signed it, blah, blah, blah. But it's not enough. I would not be surprised if, when this is not over in the next few weeks, that Congress starts floating the idea of another stimulus package. And whenever this next stimulus package gets floated, a reoccurring monthly payment to all people under a certain income, or who are without, there will be boosts to unemployment, and then there will probably just be another flat, for lack of a better word, UBI. And that is so fascinating to think about. I mean, think about the timing of this. When I talk about defining a generation, think about the timing of this. We have a national election in April, May, June, July, August, September, October, November. 8 months, people. We have a national presidential and legislative election in 8 months. Now, that sounds like a lot of time for people to forget, but people don't forget in 8 months when they lost their job. They don't forget in 8 months when their parents died of coronavirus. They don't forget those things. And I can totally see us coming on the other side of this, whenever that may be, if it is by November, which is something we need to talk about. Coming out on the other side of this and people saying, like, if thank God we had those checks. Otherwise, it could have been so much worse. No matter what happens, we cut the checks. People are going to say the checks had a benefit. Whether they did or not, whether it was the worst idea ever, whether it was the best idea ever, that's how they're going to be spun. And basically, everybody who got the $1,200 is going to have a really hard time saying they didn't help if they used it for anything other than to dick around with. Like, I might buy like an AK or something with my $1,200. But there are people who need that money, who genuinely do need that money because they lost their jobs, because their businesses were closed down. And, you know, I mean, Caleb here says, man, we finna die. We are probably not going to die. However, this could be the beginning of something a little bit bigger. Okay, so you're bringing up some things here that I feel like I need to address in the chat. If people are so hysterically afraid now, then why weren't people paranoid during the Ebola outbreak or the Zika virus? It's all political theater. I have to disagree with you, man. Because no matter what your position is on this, more people have died from coronavirus than were infected by Ebola and Zika combined. Like every other coronavirus, like MERS, SARS, all of that, more people have died than were infected by any of those in the last 3 decades. It's like that's a substantial number. Like, this is the worst disease that the planet Earth has seen since, I think, the 70s, maybe the 80s. Yeah, I think there was a, I don't know if it was a flu that went across Asia, didn't really impact the US that much, but that I think was the worst we've had in a long time. But this is definitely, like, for people who were born past the 80s into the 90s, they've never seen anything like this. It's all been in the textbooks. Yeah, I've been alive 24 years now. I haven't seen anything like this, anything to this scale, nothing even close. And for a lot of people, that's scary. A lot of people way older than me, like my parents, they don't have any memory of any pandemic sweeping the planet. And whether or not it's 1 or 0.007% of the population or whatever, the fact that we had 1 million people infected 2 days ago, and we have 1.25 million infected today, is a big deal. The exponential curve has not hit the ceiling. And I honestly think it's pretty crazy to think that it'll be over anytime soon. A report came out. I disagree because coronavirus doesn't add up with all the numbers. With all the numbers being accurate for those having COVID-19 with preconditions or regular flu, which kills way more people every year, up to 650,000 globally. Well, I think I don't know if this is a valid point, because, okay, let's pretend like all we care about is deaths, okay? The hospitalization rate of this, like 20 and 30-year-olds still get hospitalized from this. They get pneumonia, they get a bacterial infection, they can end up with scarring on their lungs. This is not something you can just laugh at. You may not die. Sure, you may not be a part of the fatality, which is all everybody thinks about, but people right now who are recovering from the coronavirus have scarred lung tissue because of the way that COVID-19 attacks the inner lining of your lungs and your alveoli, that will cause them breathing problems for the rest of their lives. Especially if you're in that over 60 range, that is like the target zone for that. So you may not die, but like this is not something to be taken lightly. Not something to be taken lightly at all. Okay. Here's my problem with the why don't we freak out about the flu. I wasn't concerned about corona at first, but we're getting more and more reports about otherwise healthy young people being killed by it. Again, it's not even the people dying. It's the fact that if we put millions and millions of people in hospital beds, which could potentially happen if we were to like blow this off, which it might happen anyways at this rate. Like, let's just be real here for a second. Could totally happen anyways. This, there could be people like who could come out on the other side of this with medical complications that haunt them for the rest of their lives. 20, 30-year-old people, or people who smoke now. We don't have enough information on this, but basically, like, the rule of thumb is if you are a heavy smoker, Just take however old you are and add like 15, 20 years to it, because it's basically how strongly the coronavirus affects you. Celeste says my mom is in her 60s, and even she said she's never seen the shelves empty like this at the grocery stores. You know, I won't lie. I think that smartly preparing for what could potentially be ahead of this is a good idea. I don't think that... I mean, obviously, all the shelves are restocked and nobody's freaking out and buying things right now. I don't... The panic shopping wasn't justified, especially not in March. Panic shopping isn't justified now. But if you were ever going to consider, like, maybe the preppers aren't super crazy and I should start buying some forever food, like, every time I get a chance to go to the grocery store, I wouldn't blame you. It's something that I think about. Like, I had to... I mean, I went through all my stuff here and I was like, man, I don't have a bug out bag anymore. I don't have a med kit. I don't have any food stored. I don't have any water. I have my radio. That's it. So, like, if something were to happen, like, if something were to actually happen, like, let's say we had, I don't know, worst case scenario, this, like, spreads like a wildfire, it catches, it, so whatever, mutates, gets super infected. Play pretend as much as you want, or just say we have an economic collapse. I lose my job. I can't make any money. Potentially, any number of things could happen. You know, already the food banks are being cleaned out all across the country. I mean, who are you gonna rely on, really? Potentially the government, right? If you want, I think honestly, if you lose your job and you need the money, do not burn the Trump check, as people are saying, or like, don't like take the money out of your bank account and throw it on the ground or whatever. And you know, people are saying like you can't. If you need this money, in my personal opinion, the government is almost completely responsible for you losing your job in most cases, almost every case. So I think you are due some kind of compensation from them, and I think this barely scratches the surface. Like Mary was saying earlier, like, woohoo, $1,200 and you ruined my business. Thank you. Most of those people probably made more money than the $1,200 will allow. They may get a part of that if they're lucky. And so I'm not... When I say this is going to define a generation, like, this is something that we're going to look back on every time we talk about healthcare for the next forever. 50 years, 30, 40 years probably. 30, 40 years probably, honestly, is probably how long we'll be talking about this like it just happened yesterday. Every time healthcare gets brought up, they'll say, if only we had single-payer healthcare, or if only the government wasn't involved. And again, you know, I'm not really so much talking about this from the voluntarious angle. I'm just trying to be objective and give you guys my thoughts afterwards, past the objectivity about what I think this is going to do in the future. But I think every single person who isn't in the framework of someone like who's like me, say a voluntarist, or like some of you guys here in the chat, it's something that I think we have to consider, that when you collect that $1,200 for someone who really needs it, say you are someone who genuinely needs it because you lost your job and you don't understand the fact that you lost your job, and you can almost solely blame it on the mandatory closing by government agencies. All you see is the government's coming by and being like, look, we know you're in a bad spot, here's $1,200 on us. That's how everybody sees it, right? I mean, not everybody, the royal everybody. That's how 90% of the people... I've been referring to Trump bucks as my second tax return. Fundamentally, I think that's how like libertarians and voluntarists should view it, is it's kind of like a return on investment, a really bad return on investment. But when if we see more businesses close, that's going to be the big indicator for me. Like, seeing temporary firings, seeing furloughing, seeing stuff like that, that is something that I can That's something that I think we can come back from. You know, if 10 million people in the service industry get fired, but none of the restaurants close down, and they can come right back to work when this ends, and however long that is, none of us know. Then sure, I think we could have a much snappier recovery from all of this. But the question is, how many businesses go under, and then how many of those unemployed people have no money to spend? And this is where I think the secret, the chemical X of all of this is the stimulus. If we pull a Canada and we start giving, I think they're doing like 1,400 Canadian dollars a month or something like that. If we start issuing monthly stimulus checks to every, tax-paying qualifying person in America, I think that, I mean, there's so much speculation I have to do when I talk about this, but I think it's so interesting that I really want to talk about it. Uh, so like, okay, basically we're printing money from nowhere to give to people as a representation of labor that no one so far has questioned, to then spend, right? Someone posted a really good point, and they said, it was a meme, obviously, but I think there's it's a thought experiment almost, right? And they said, if the government can just print as much money as they want, which is a very crude explanation of the relationship between the Federal Reserve and the United States government, but if they can, the IRS was on 60 Minutes. One of the spokespersons from, not the IRS, the Federal Reserve, was on 60 Minutes and talked about how, fundamentally speaking, there is an infinite money supply. At what point is the collection of taxes from the citizenry necessary to fund a government in that situation? Some people say it's like an asset collateral kind of stuff against all of the lending. But yeah, I know, Celeste. Yeah, I don't know if any of you guys, you must have not seen the clip. But yeah, he said, fundamentally, like, theoretically speaking, there's an infinite money supply. Like, we can expand it to meet whatever needs we have as an economy. And so basically what he's saying is $2 trillion, $4 trillion, $8 trillion, 16, 20, 32 trillion, 64 trillion, 128 trillion, doesn't matter. It's all just ether money, right? And there will be, I mean, theoretically speaking, right? Something that I've come to realize about economics that is kind of a hard pill to swallow is that if we all just lie to ourselves and everybody just kind of agrees to lie to each other, in a fiat currency, there's pretty much nothing you can't do. Like, seriously, think about it, okay? Like, this is something I had to kind of take my preconceptions about my Austrian economics idea of how economies and money function, how currency functions as an exchange of goods, right? But when you use a currency as a representation of labor, which is fundamentally what we use it for, right? We say your labor is worth X number of dollars, right? And the dollars don't have necessarily any inherent value other than being a representation of your labor. So if we can get to the point to where we can just say, like, here is your labor bucks, right? Then, and I'm trying to expand on this in the most coherent way possible, but if no one challenges the currency, if no one stops and says, like, it's not worth that, then really we can all just keep playing pretend. And that's a crazy thing to think about, really, because really, when it comes down to it, we think of especially people who come from like an Austrian economics mindset like I do, we think of economic principles as laws that cannot be broken. And there are forces that you can't defeat, right? Every hill has a valley, every valley has a hill, usually. Actually, that last part isn't true, but every hill has a valley. Not every valley has a hill. And but I think that to a certain extent, like we're kind of proving right now that playing pretend works. It really does. And that's so fascinating to me, honestly. Because if you really think about the ramifications of that, like, I mean, that's like opening up the door to some kind of Star Trek, like, fiat money is a rabbit hole in of itself. Exactly. It's so crazy to think about because it isn't even a representation of labor. Like that's kind of how the easiest way I think to think about U.S. currency is. It's not a good by which goods are exchanged. You know, like a piece of gold is a good by which or for which goods are exchanged. I'm sorry, I said that wrong. It's very important. A piece of gold is a good for which goods are exchanged. I will give you 4 gold coin for 4 chickens because these are of equivalent value. Instead, we say, I will give you 4 of my labor dollars because this is how we symbolize a transfer of wealth. I inputted 4 hours or 4 labor dollar hours of work into the system, and then I get out of it 4 chickens. It's all like a big kumbaya circle, holding hands and like rocking back and forth, right? I mean, but again, until somebody says no and breaks the chain, where does the chain break? That's the question I'm trying to ask right now because I don't know if I have a good answer for that. The Fed is unsustainable to the point where they have to print more money for the loans that they give to others that will eventually pay more than what was borrowed for. It's a scam built on debt slavery. I don't disagree with any of that, but fundamentally speaking, I've said that like 20 times today. I'm sorry. When you look at what the purpose of a centralized bank is, a centralized bank is intentionally designed to give you a ton of power over monetary policy. And you can do some really interesting things with that. Forget the ethics. Like, let's just, again, today is less about voluntarism and more about discussing the impact of COVID. We will talk plenty of voluntarism in the future, I promise. But let's take all of the ethics of a central banking system and just kind of throw it out the window. We can't, know thy enemy sort of thing. Let's just pretend we have no biases against this sort of institution existing, which I have tons of, but we're going to pretend I don't. Ron Paul, is that you? Yeah. Technically, there's no such thing as money. It's currency. Yeah. Okay. I think you're correct. I do think, however, that every instance I use the word money, it would be directly transferred. Or you could put currency in the same place, and it would mean the same thing. So, but thank you for correcting me. You are technically right. There is no such thing as money. It is currency. Ron Paul, is that you? Jeez. Yeah. So, basically, what I was getting at though is if you look at what a central bank was designed to do, banking systems before the central bank were very, very chaotic, very unruly, disorganized, and a lot of these things I optimistically think can be attributed to the lack of something called the internet and electricity. Synonymous is close. Yeah, I mean, that's kind of what I was going for there. But I think a lot of these modern innovations that have allowed for things like cryptocurrencies to become actual actual things of reality would have helped a lot in a decentralized banking environment. But these institutions became a thing because all of the pieces individually couldn't cooperate in a way that certain people wanted them to, typically people of power, right? When all of the central banks squabbled and then there was a banking collapse, which is just a normal part of banking, believe it or not. If you're going to lend, there's going to eventually be some sort of banking collapse, or at least a bubble popping. But this is, again, the hills and valleys thing. Every time a central bank has been put into place, it's gotten more powerful and it's been given more of the reins. Because the more separated a central bank is from a government, no matter how tied it is to it, but the more separated a central bank is from a government, the more flexibility it gives that central bank to have a credibility in of itself. So, the credit rating of the United States means nothing about the credit rating of the Federal Reserve. It means nothing. It has no correlation between the two. The ability of the United States to pay off its debts, to faithfully comply to its obligations, has nothing to do with the Federal Reserve. They are completely separate institutions, financially speaking, in that specific example. And the power that the Federal Reserve gives to, issue $2 trillion in financial relief to major industries is something that is impossible to do in free market society. It is impossible to levy $2 trillion from the ether and inject it into a faltering area of an economy. Competitive currencies in America were good and sustainable to hold the dollar valuable to trade notes based on credit of your traded commodities rather than monopolized currency based on nothing. So like ethically speaking, competing currencies should be allowed, and there were issues with so great example is during the Articles of Confederation, basically every state had regional banks that all kind of operated under the state, but not really. They were mostly just regional banks. But the biggest issue with regional banks back in the day was that they didn't always have a unified exchange policy, I suppose. Like, just if I took $50 from the Bank of Houston and went to the Bank of I don't know, Santa Fe down the street and went to go deposit it there, it's almost certainly not a 1-to-1 ratio. It's probably going to have a transferring fee. It's going to have all these other things, and it just wasn't worth it, right? It just wasn't worth it. I think a lot of those issues are kind of gone today. And the only issue that we have now is whether or not a seller would accept your regional currency. But I mean, really, like, I don't think the banking industry would start competing currencies without, making sure that these would at least be interchangeable for their own best interests, right? Like, how do you go from US dollars to Bitcoin if you can't buy any Bitcoin with US dollars, right? It's not like, I guess you could mine it, but you would have way less people get into it than if people could exchange their existing currency for the alternative currency. And really, I think crypto is going to be, I think we need better solutions for crypto banking. I think wallets have security issues that to this day really need to be optimized, particularly with things like quantum computing, but that's a totally different discussion. But I do think that cryptocurrency has definitely, the blockchain technology has the future to revolutionize the financial system of the entire world if we allow it to. And let me drink some of this real quick. Getting slightly parched. I would be better off with a decentralized banking system than a centralized one. Well, decentralized banking systems have a lot of power too, and the fact that if the Bank of Oklahoma cranks out, $70 quintillion tomorrow, it doesn't devalue your currency into like a slush. Your currency retains its value because it's based off of whatever you set your currency up to be. And I've had a lot of conversations with people about this, but I can't, every time I go through this thought experiment, I find it difficult to see the issue of using a currency symbolic of labor as a currency by which we trade goods. Like, if we both agree that one chicken equals 4 labor dollars in labor currency, then I don't see the issue with having labor currency be backed by nothing other than your uncalculatable, intangible input into the economy. It's just one of those things. Like, I used to be like, oh man, like, we can't have these currencies based on nothing. Like, I do think they should be finite. I do think they should be infinitely divisible. Or not, divisible to like the 8th decimal place. Like, I think this is what Bitcoin is divisible to. Because then you solve the issue of money not being compartmentalizable. If I can give you 0.00001 Bitcoin for you cutting my hair, it doesn't matter if 1 Bitcoin is worth, $1 million. We can still use however many Bitcoin exist. We just have to keep compartmentalizing them, or not compartmentalizing them, but chopping them up into smaller pieces, whatever that is, whatever. And so really, I mean, seriously though, like this is something that I actually spend a lot of time thinking about, because it's something that I get challenged on often, but I don't ever really hear anything that I feel like is an actual critique of the idea that, I mean, because essentially contract law comes into play at that point, right? And what all this has to do with COVID, since we're talking about COVID here, is that I think what we could be seeing is, yeah, I can put a link up to it. I'll just put it up here on the screen in a second after I make this point. I think we're going to see a lot, and this is crazy to think about because the last few decades we've been really strong about this, but I think we've really been looking at a potential mega flex of just how far can we push the monetary system that we have in the United States. And I think COVID is going to be a big part of that. And I think what happens next will pretty much decide whether or not we wind up in like Star Trek Utopia, where wealth can be pulled out, as Sam Harris says, where wealth is nearly infinitely reproducible, which again, we're not gonna get into that point. We can talk about that another day. But or if it will devalue itself into the nothingness. But the one thing that I will say that people who, say that we can just pull wealth out of the ether is someone has to check. Someone has to come in and say, like, well, like Walmart has to say, okay, we just got $2 trillion. So now your gallon of milk is worth $1.20 instead of $1. Sorry. For companies who are locked in the United States, like say, I don't know, they chop down the cedar in their backyard and then they split the cedar, and then, they grow their own trees and it's all localized to the United States. There's no reason for them to adjust their pricing based off of, unless the only thing that I could see is that, and this is like the argument for minimum wage, right, is that if it were to trickle down, which recent evidence has shown, unless you give the people directly this money, there's not really any evidence to suggest that wage growth will keep pace with the inflation of the GDP. I mean, we proved that over the last 20 years. There's no doubt about that. Like, wage growth has not kept pace with GDP growth. But what I was kind of getting at is that there's no real reason for them to change their pricing unless they can afford to charge more and people will pay it. And then everything will just even out. Everything will just even out at that point. For hyperinflation to kick in, someone has to say, like, your dollar is not worth my 0.93 euros. And a lot of people have a lot to lose if the dollar goes down. That there's like a saying, and it's like, if the dollar loses, everyone loses. And we're not as financially monolithic as we once were, say back in like even the early 2000s and the 90s, but we are still the largest, most powerful economy on planet Earth. The only reason China isn't there is because they still have people living in freaking rice fields. But once they modernize, it'll be them. So, sorry, let me read your comments real quick. And I'll post that link while I'm doing this. It's really easy. I'll just post it as a little text box on the screen. Oh, that's not what I wanted. Sorry, I'm trying to look around my microphone. Post it right there. Cool. We'll just put this. We'll put it on the bottom. Whoa, it's a little big. It's really easy. Track corona.live/map. If I'd known it was that easy, I would have just said it, but I wasn't really paying attention. So yeah, it should be on your screen now, so you should be able to see that. Yeah, it's because of that Carol Baskin. I got proof example of inflation from my area. A $12 carton of medium eggs went from $1.50 to like $2.56. See, but is that supply and demand, or is that inflation? I mean, it could be both, I suppose. But I mean, if, like, let's say, if you're getting less eggs in, okay, then you naturally, because of scarcity, you would increase the price of the eggs. This is why things like price gouging, while may not be the most tasteful thing, is economically ethical. I wouldn't say socially ethical, but yeah, it's like, I'm not, like I said, I'm not I'm not some fancy PhD economist. I'm sure if I had a conversation with Tom Woods or something, he would have a lot of stuff to teach me about this. But again, I'm just kind of more vocalizing what I'm seeing than I am making any overarching points. I'm not saying that, you know, our currency is going to devalue into basically being like worth less than butt paper, which, if you run with the idea that our currency is fundamentally just some extrapolation of labor, then, butt paper is more inherently valuable than your labor. It has more tangible value than your dollar, most likely. Unless you do it by like sheet, then it's probably less, but especially by the roll, 100%. The materials used there is certainly worth more tangibly than the materials used to make your dollar. Price gouging in an appropriate way is something I've learned to embrace. I mean, you don't have to embrace it, That's like saying you embrace any other less than fun thing about a ideology. I just think you don't have to embrace it. You just have to learn to accept it. It's a natural market force. For every person who says, "Oh my God, I can't afford hand sanitizer," there will be 10 times as many people who say, "I physically can't get hand sanitizer because somebody bought all the hand sanitizer." Like, we were seeing that. People were buying hand sanitizer for, whatever price was deemed acceptable, which these things all have to be dealt with in post. It's not like the government is sitting over your local CVS saying like, "Oh, did you just raise the price to $6? That's illegal. Bring it back down." Almost all these things get brought up in post. Every gas station that ever gets hit during every hurricane for price gouging, whatever, you're like, "Oh, they raised their price 50 cents, price gouging." Ooh, I mean, these people, this all gets dealt with in post. So it's not like there's a big automated checking system that stops all of this. But I really do think that this will be the reference point for politics in the near future. Like, cool. Active shooters, that was cool. 9/11, that was pretty big. It's pretty big. This is something that has impacted all of our lives. No matter how much 9/11 affected you, unless you lived in basically New York City or like the general New York area, really, I mean, this has almost undoubtedly impacted you more than that. It's just because some idiot buys 100 cases of toilet paper to then resell it at a higher value is at a loss, because people will create alternatives to manage their survival of popular demand. The one thing I will say is that it's very hard to find substitutes for toilet paper unless you have water. And if you have water that, you want to like put in an orifice or near an orifice, it's probably clean enough to drink. And if you're in a situation where you're squirting water on your bung, then you probably should be drinking that water. Again, though, I mean, I'm not saying you're wrong. I'm just throwing that out there. Yeah. I feel like I was kind of all over the place this episode. And, I mean, I feel like I usually am all over the place. But I think we hit a lot of the points that I wanted to talk about. I'm interested to see how things are going to go. Notice I didn't give any predictions. I'm not going to tell you, like, 20 million people are going to get sick. Because I think what I want to wrap up on is that there's still so much we don't know. It's become like an automatic response that for every person who says that they have everything figured out about this virus is for me to just almost automatically discredit them. Usually I'll listen because sometimes they might have something interesting to say. But if someone comes up to you and is like, "Oh, listen, and this is not an epidemiologist, this is not somebody who works in the field or has really, for all intents and purposes, any real understanding of the field, but other than like, oh yeah, I watched World War Z and I understand epidemiology now because patient zero." I've had a lot of interactions with some people who are talking out of their league, basically. But just make sure that you aren't falling into the traps of people who are trying to coax something out of you, coax a response out of you. There are people who want to say, oh my God, 100 million people are going to die. Buy my book. Those are the people you need to watch out for. Or the 100 million people are going to die and this person sucks. Or like, I'm just going to say the opposite of whatever this person says. If someone says 1 million people are going to die, here's the model, and they'll usually say this hasn't been peer reviewed, then do with it what you want. But none of it is set in stone. I think it's important to remember. Okay, he's had another comment here. But why the hell buy all the toilet paper? You being an idiot for buying it, and eventually you will sell it at a normal price for what the market scales to, or donate it because you were being dumb to scam others. Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of people just kind of jump into these things without thinking. Another thing, I mean, this isn't price gouging because price gouging requires there to be a crisis, but it's like the same thing as when people, like a new electronics product comes out and people buy like 20 of them. Yeah, every time like a new iPhone comes out, there's always people who buy like 20, 25 iPhones and they sell them for double, triple the price or whatever because, pre-orders are sold out and you can't get it for like a week and people need it right then. Yeah, I mean, that's the kind of stuff that I'm really talking about is these fringe examples. I don't even know where I was going there. I think I've said everything I need to at this point. Unless you guys have anything else for me, I think I've said plenty. I've talked so freaking much. If you guys know someone who has a podcast or does a YouTube channel or does anything cool at all and would be willing to talk to me, I do news and political philosophy, if you can't tell, ethics already. But if you know any of these people, go ahead. You could send them a message. Send me a message. I'm totally interested in interviewing or being on anybody's show. I just love to talk about this stuff. This is my hobby. I make literally $0 doing this. I appreciate all of you guys who support me on Patreon because you guys help me get closer every month to that dream of covering our operating costs for Liberty After Dark. Can I do a live stream with you someday? Yeah, hit me up and send me a message or something and we'll talk it out. How about that? And yeah, so I think that's all I've got for today. Yeah, make sure you guys check out the Facebook page, like over there. I post a lot of updates there. I've been kind of slow lately. Go check out the podcast. It's available on like every podcast distributor under planet Earth. If you guys like video games, I've been playing a lot of Escape from Tarkov. I will stream it sometimes. I'm bad. Mixer, Twitch, YouTube, Facebook Gaming, and YouTube Gaming. They are separate channels on Facebook and YouTube. Twitch and Mixer, it's the same channel. So if you like using Mixer, just stay on Mixer. If you like using Twitch, just stay on Twitch. But yeah, I think that's all I've got, guys. Anybody else got anything before we go? Cool. I'm going to take that as a no. Everybody have a fantastic rest of your night and stay safe. Make sure you guys stay safe.